Greetings, Cap fans, and welcome to episode 134 of the Captain America Comic Book Fans podcast. I'm your host, Rick Verbanis, and as always, I'm joined by the best gosh darn co-host out there. His name is Bob Lucius. I call him Bob. Oh, Bob, I got a girlfriend that's better than this, but you don't remember it all. As we get older and stop making sense, you won't find her waiting long. Stop making sense. Stop making sense. I got a girlfriend. She's better than that. And nothing is better than this. Is it?
Is it, Rick? Is it? Is it, Rick? I mean, is it really?
Exactly.
You're not.
It doesn't get any better than this, Bob.
Yeah, you're not making sense.
I've stopped making sense. You probably don't recognize the song.
I do. Now I do. Yeah, of course.
It's Girlfriend is Better. But who is the band?
The Talking Heads?
It is the Talking Heads.
Yeah.
And why did I pick that song?
Because you're a big fan.
I'm a good fan. I'm not a big fan. Oh, I like Talking Heads, especially back in the day.
Yeah.
But I you know who was a huge Talking Heads fan back in the day?
I don't.
Bob, we've been doing this a long time. Do you ever put two and two together and go?
I really don't. I'm not a mathematician.
Bob, what are we talking about today?
Was it Mark Gruenwald?
Yes, it was Mark. Yes, we even brought that up many times in this podcast series. We have brought it up a few times that he's a big Talking Heads fan.
It must have been one of those times when I had you muted.
Probably. Right. Your eyes tend to glaze over sometimes when I'm talking. Yeah. So yes, Mark Gruenwald, who we are celebrating today, is he was a pretty big Talking Heads fan, and I'm gonna tie it all together, Bob. Do you know what was the issue number of Captain America when he started writing the series? Oh, don't you start Googling. I can see the reflection in your glasses.
I'm wondering.
I see the screen.
That's not what I was Googling, actually. I was trying to remember the lead singer of the Talking Heads. Byrne, was this?
Yeah, it's David Byrne. Yeah.
I just saw one an advertisement last week.
Oh, really?
Yeah, is he coming back out with an album or something? But he tried on that suit again.
The large suit.
Yeah, he's by the way guy now, and he put on that suit and he was trying it out in his bedroom.
Oh, really? I'll have to check that out. Yeah, so Stop Making Sense was a lyric in the song Girlfriend is Better, but it was also the name of the album, the live album, and the movie.
Yeah, it's coming back
that was made for. It was called Stop Making Sense.
Yeah.
And in the concert, yes, he wore the large suit at the end of the concert. But you can't get away with it, Bob.
No.
What was
the
first issue?
No idea.
That Mark Gruenwald wrote.
Couldn't tell you.
Take a wild guess.
I have no idea. None.
The
bow.
All right, let's work this through, Bob.
All
right. What was the last issue that J.M. DeMatteis wrote?
No idea.
Oh, come on.
Rick, I do not remember these numbers.
Yes, but think of the conversations. We had DeMatteis on the show.
Yes, I know.
Right?
Yeah.
And the last story that he was doing was the big Red Skull Captain America death issue. And he was after that, he quit the book.
Yeah.
What was the big death issue for Captain America versus Red Skull?
Was it something 50?
It was 300, Bob.
Oh, 300 there. Oh, big issue 300. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Coming back to you now?
Yep, I got it. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Now, let's take it one step further.
All right.
Right? There was a writer between DeMatteis and Mark Gruenwald.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask you who that was.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. It was Mike Carlin. All right. How many issues did he do?
4.
That's a bad guess, Bob. And I'm going to tell you why. We just did the favorite Captain America writer bracket. Yeah. We had 32 writers on there. Yeah. Mike Carlin was one of the writers.
He was.
What was one of the prerequisites for a writer to make the top 32?
5?
6 issues, Bob.
6.
It had to be 6.
Where'd you come up with 6?
I don't know.
Just roll the dice.
I know it was one of those things where it was like, well, can I add them? Oh, they only wrote 6. Okay, well then that's the minimum.
Okay.
So it was one of those things, right?
Yeah. Had
so
32.
All right. So if the last issue of DeMatteis was
here we go with the math again.
The last issue of DeMatteis was number
300.
300.
All right.
And if Mike Carlin wrote 6 issues, what would be the first issue that Mark Gruenwald?
307.
Yes. Look at you.
I passed 3rd grade math.
Look at you. All right. Absolutely.
Mark This is Gruenwald, why my son doesn't ask me to help him with his math homework.
Yeah, it's the new math. So if the issue 307 was the first issue Mark Gruenwald and kicked off his 10-year run of writing Captain America. Take a wild guess. What do you think the title to issue 307 was?
Captain America.
The title to his story was...
Oh, I can't recall.
Stop Making Sense.
Oh, Rick, you are amazing. I don't know if people tell you that regularly throughout the day.
But
I want to reinforce it right now that you are wonderful.
I just don't know how you don't pick up on this stuff. Why would I pick that song? And it comes back. You could have I mean, it's deductive reasoning, right?
Yeah. It is when you already have the answer. Yeah, it makes sense. It seems really easy.
I make a great detective when I write the detective story.
Just one more thing. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. So today we are celebrating Mark Gruenwald. Why are we doing that? Well, if you've been living under a rock, in beginning of March, I think it was like March 5th or something like that, we kicked off this year's bracket, Cap Madness bracket. This is our 3rd one. We did in 2001, we did favorite Captain America artist. 2002 or 22, I should say, we did favorite Captain America cover. This year we decided to do writer. And so we had 32 writers, and Mark Gruenwald won. And so we figured we would want to have on today a couple of guests to help celebrate. And so we have Catherine Schuller-Gruenwald, which was Mark's wife, and Jason Olsen, who wrote an excellent book about Mark Gruenwald and his 10-year writing of Captain America. So we're going to have them on the show today.
That's exciting stuff, Rick. And it's a great combination. So kudos on putting this together. And by the way, kudos on that March Madness. I know a lot of folks really enjoyed that. And it was a great outlet for a lot of folks. And I know they're already looking forward to next March. So.
Well, it was my pleasure. It was a labor of love, and thanks for showing up today, Bob. It's yeah, we always appreciate that.
I feel it's the least I can do.
It really is. So, and we're gonna have a few other surprises today to celebrate Mark too. So, I don't want to give any of those away. We do have some birthdays, Bob. We have some birthdays this week of famous Captain America creators. And when I say that, creators, I feel like I want to do it in Marvin the Martian voice. Creators. I'm going to blow up the earth.
Nicely done. Yeah.
I don't know. It just comes out. So, yeah. Well, this one is really not a huge creator known, but celebrating today, if you're listening today, which is May 3rd, today's birthday is Bill Sienkiewicz. And so he's done some Cap stuff. He did some cool covers. He did that really cool What If cover.
Yeah.
Right. He's did a few others.
I know stuff. See?
Yeah. Good for you. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. So he did back in 1990, we were celebrating 50 years of Captain America, and Marvel did a couple of different, specials and then collections and things like that. And so Bill Sienkiewicz did this really cool poster. Pull it up because I have one here. It's beat to heck, but it's special. Do you remember this poster?
Yeah,
Bob?
I think I have one of those.
Yeah. Guess what? Look at that.
Wow. Look at that.
There's a little note that says, yes, that is Bill Sienkiewicz's signature.
Wow.
Yeah. So I have this. This was it was a gift sent to me by Ken Fries, who does a lot of different really cool Facebook groups focused on artists. And the one I visit the most is probably the Mike Zeck page. And he also launched one not too long ago for Kevin McGuire. And as you know, I'm a huge Kevin McGuire fan. And so I highly suggest people go check out those groups because it's a lot of fun. It's just basically posting art of those creators. But anyway, yeah. And I don't know about you, but when I was younger, I didn't know how to pronounce Sienkiewicz.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I used to call him Bill Sienkiewicz's.
Yeah. And until let's see, when did I realize? Just tonight, actually. So congratulations, you've taught me something tonight.
Oh, you were today years old when you learned that it was Sienkiewicz. And listen, I'm pretty sure it is. I've heard that during like interviews and things like that, but I could be getting it wrong too. So don't quote me.
Well, was that it? Was it just one birthday?
Oh, no, there's another birthday coming up May 6th. Friend of the show, friend of the Facebook group, Mr. John Beatty.
Wow. All right.
Yes. Embellisher, inker, penciler, just an all around swell guy, longtime partner of Mike Zeck, John Beatty. He celebrates a birthday May 6th. And actually, we had him on the show. If you remember that?
I do. Unforgettable.
Yeah, we had him on episode 43. If anybody wants to check that out, he was on the show. I guess it was August of 2021, I want to say. So yeah, way back in episode 43. But John came on and told us some really cool stories, including his time with Mike Zeck. So that was fun. Happy birthday to John.
Like really like personal stories, right? They're about their friendship and how they got to know each other. And
yeah,
it's nice. It was a great interview.
It was. Yeah. It's always fun running into him at various shows because he does a lot of shows in the area that I live in. So it's always nice running into him.
Doesn't he live in Florida? Like, how is that possible?
I don't know.
I don't have shows down here to run into people.
You have plenty of shows down there. You just don't go to them.
Well, they're like up in Orlando. Yeah. It's like 4.5 hours away.
Okay. So Bob, did you get anything new? Anything new recently that you're hiding from your wife?
No, nothing new that I'm hiding. Last thing, was that Captain Carter statue that I got. She comes into my office every now and again and she looks up on my shelves and she goes, "Is that new?" And I'm like, "That thing?" No, it was in a box in the garage. I was just cleaning out, moving things around.
Yeah, I like to change things up.
I like to, keep things interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I got some new art coming in, and I don't want to say. I mean, obviously, by the time they listen to this, I've already posted it in the Facebook group. But I have 2 pieces. One I won an auction. It's a really cool Tim Sale piece from Captain America White. Really cool piece. And then I got this other piece that's really, really cool. It's like, all right, I'm done for the year. It's I got a John Byrne. I got a page from the Stern Byrne, those 9 issues.
Yeah.
I got a really cool page of Cap in uniform with his shield doing acrobats.
Wow.
It is a really, really cool page. Like I was after this from a private collector, and I made him an offer he couldn't refuse.
It sounds so fancy when you say that. Like, I was a private collector.
Well, I'm a private collector. You're a private collector.
I love that way that sounds. It just sounds so fancy. Yeah. Well, we're fancy, Rick.
Yes, we are. We are indeed. So Bob, let's get to celebrating Mark. Let's go ahead and let Catherine and Jason out of the green room.
Sounds good.
Starting back on March 5th, we kicked off this year's Cap Madness bracket with 32 Captain America writers battling it out for the honor of favorite Captain America writer. They were seeded by members of our Facebook group and then voted on daily. And we ended it on April 9th. And it came down to the top 4 seeds in the final 4, with ultimately the number 1 seed, Mark Gruenwald, beating out number 2 seed, Ed Brubaker. And, it was all in good fun, but we wanted to celebrate Mark, and we couldn't think of having 2 better people than our guest today to help discuss Mark's legacy. We have joining us today Mark's wife, Catherine Schuller-Gruenwald, and Jason Olsen, who is the author of the book, Mark Gruenwald and the Star-Spangled Symbolism of Captain America, 1985 to 1995. So welcome back to the show, both of you.
Thank you, Rick. It's a delight to be here. I'm so glad Mark won. Couldn't have been more deserved. And I'm so excited to talk to Jason and all you guys are fans like Mark would have liked it. He said, I love my fans and my fans really get me. And Jason has definitely proven that with that book. I mean, the topic sense of that book was when Mark died, a giant hole was left in the industry. And it couldn't have been more true than ever. But his work lives on, and it's just great that the fans are still happening and discovering it. So that's one of the things that I'm so excited about is that I have fans who are in their 60s, but I have fans who are in their 20s.
Absolutely, and we're excited to talk about that today, and also welcome to you, Jason.
And thank you for having me again. It's so great to be back, especially again on such exciting circumstances. I admit I have been very engrossed over the last several weeks in the bracket, and it's been fun to follow along and vote and see the passion and enthusiasm. And I look forward to talking about all aspects of this, especially Mark, and getting to talk about the great work that he did and how it's still resonating today, which is just wonderful and such an amazing thing.
Yeah, and Mark obviously, is legendary when it comes to Captain America. I mean, he surpassed Stan Lee as the longest tenured writer of Captain America, writing for the series from 1985 to 95, and I think it was something like 140 issues. He's obviously very beloved by Cap fans. So Catherine, Mark was known for his sense of humor, his playfulness. What would he have thought of a bracket like this with 32 Cap writers? Would he have found it fun and watched it, or would he have been thought it was silly and not care?
Oh, I think he would have loved it because he loved games and he loved competition, and it wasn't that he liked being better than anybody, but he loved playing games with the fans. I went many times to Comic-Cons. Had to record him playing games with them. So anything that engages the writer, engages the fans, and to get into the writer's work and to appreciate him and what he was trying to accomplish. I think that's what the true essence of what you did with this contest is. How well do you know Gru? How well do you know Englehart? How well do you appreciate, Ed? How all those aspects come into play, and I think Mark would have just absolutely loved that whole just whatever gets fans to read.
Right.
Maybe somebody discovered it through your contest and read some of the comments and said, let me check that out. 307. Let me see. I don't know, went back that far,
And Bob knows the title to that issue now. Bob, what was it?
Stop Making Sense, Rick.
Yeah, that's it.
Everybody knows that.
That's it. You know why? Because Mark was a huge David Byrne fan. I mean, we saw Talking Heads a lot of times together, and it was funny because a few years ago, before COVID, American Utopia was on Broadway, and I had just come from teaching, and I said, let me go in and see if I could get a ticket because it was sold out. And so I went to the box office, and they said, oh yeah, there's one left. So I was like, great, I'll take it. I ran up to the balcony, sat in the seat. This woman comes and sits down, not in the seat next to me that was empty, but in the seat over there. and the next to the empty seat, and the lights dimmed, and I just felt Mark's presence, and I said, the last ticket, I don't think so. And so all through the concert, I knew he was there, and the woman said to me, "Isn't it great the seat was empty?" I said, "It really wasn't empty. My husband was probably sitting there." And it was just a funny like moment in time where I thought Mark had to be at that concert. He loved that. He was a huge David Byrne fan. He had a signed album, with the big suit. I had a comedy group called The Nerve, and it was all about the business suit. I built a big business suit. So that whole Talking Heads theme was through both of our lives. And that is just a little anecdote, but I think he was definitely at American Utopia with me.
That's a very sweet story.
Yeah.
And when you were on the show last, and you actually touched on a little bit here just a minute ago, you mentioned Mark once said to you, "I don't have many fans, but the ones I do have really get me." And that comment always struck with me. And would the results of the bracket have made him realize he does have many fans?
Yeah, I mean, he was always humble, because at Comic-Cons, I mean, there were lines for many writers who were more popular than Captain America, but he appreciated what he was trying to, and he answered every single fan mail that he got, every single piece of letter, because Stan answered his letters, and he got published in the letters to the editors when he was a little boy, and he said, "I knew I wanted to write when I saw my letter in print." And a lot of people have said that when they got printed in the editor's page, that it really impacted them. And he answered every single fan mail. And I mean, not only did he write Captain America, Quasar, all the titles he worked on and edited, but he also answered fan mail in his spare time. And he even had a translator for the Italian fan mail he got, and Joe Andreotti translated all that too. So he not only answered the American letters, but also the European fans.
That's pretty amazing.
Jason, yeah. I see you smiling and nodding. Did you want to add something to that?
It's I obviously didn't get the good fortune. I wish I could have interacted with him. I wish I could have, if I was smart enough to have written one of those letters when I was a kid. I wish I could have, and I wish I would have. But it just so fits everything that I've heard. I mean, somebody who was just so generous with his time and with his creative talents. And I thought about your comment a lot of Mark's fan base when I was thinking about this bracket, because I wondered, like, what if this bracket was in a more general comics Facebook group? If this would have been done in just Marvel, DC comic fan, and every year they had a different bracket of best writer on a given character, and you had a Spider-Man one year, Batman one year, and this year just happened to be Captain America. Would Gru have won that? I mean, because I think that a lot of people who know him and know the work and understand the work, it really connected. But, somebody else in another group, in the way I would, if I was picking my favorite Batman writer, I haven't spent that much time in that universe. I don't know who I'd pick. But what I think matters here is that the fans of this character resonated with, or Gruenwald resonated with them in a way that I just don't think would happen if you just got a huge mainstream group. And it really hits me with what you're talking about with that, Catherine, this idea that everybody who really understood him really got the work, and others maybe would dismiss it, and it felt like even in the conversations, there was a little bit of a detachment between, the superhero part and the super soldier part. And we could talk about that as it goes on. But I thought it was really interesting that Mark won. And I was thrilled too, because he really understood this character in a way that I don't think anyone else has. Who's written it, at least in my opinion, although there have been some amazing writers and still are today.
So, Catherine, you are very generous with your time. You're out interacting with fans to this day. And undoubtedly, you most likely heard of stories of fans interacting with Mark back in the day. Did any stand out for you? Do you recall any? Any of
Well,
those stories of
you know,
interaction?
he has these you know, fans like Scott Tipton, you know, that story about him calling him and saying, you know, about these arrows, because Scott wrote him about the arrows weren't barbed enough in Hawkeye that he wouldn't be able to penetrate anything. And so he got a real kick out of playing with the fans. One fan, and these are the days before you charged for an autograph, but one fan actually brought all of Mark's work and made him sign it at a Comic-Con. He got a kick out of that. He said, I can't believe I had to sign all those books. But I think it's probably documented too. Somebody, you know, he said, I can't believe how this fan pranked me. And he just said, you know what? You're going to be over the top and bring me all my books. I'm going to sign every one of them.
That's great.
I mean, a nut. Yes.
Yeah.
He's such a nut.
And how about you, Jason? When you were doing research for the book or speaking about it afterwards, have you any stories you heard about Mark that stood out?
I didn't hear a lot of very personal, specific stories, but what I always think about is just how available he was, and you know, Catherine's story about him at the Comic-Cons and those conventions and interacting with people. But how he interacted with those of us who didn't go to those conventions kind of hits too. The idea of like the Marks for Marks and all of these columns that he did over the years, even beyond his work, that made him feel so real. And I have a friend who passed away a few years ago, and not to get, you know, move in a totally different direction here, but I have a friend that passed away a few years ago, very unexpectedly, very young, and he and I used to talk on the phone pretty regularly, but in the last couple of years of his life, every conversation was just over text at that point. And, you know, and I kind of liked talking to him on the phone. We still did, and then after he passed away, which was still a shock, even if he wasn't well, I realized that he had left this gift, and he had left this gift of all of these messages that we had accumulated over virtually every day over the previous couple of years. And I think in a way, some of Mark's columns, and obviously all of his creative work, is that gift that he left to us. And I cherish it so much. And as a creative writer, with my day job is I get to teach creative writing and occasionally comics and graphic novels. He talks so much about writing too. And I want to take a look. I don't know if you have a copy of Quasar number 59 sitting next to your desk, but I
just moved it. I just
let
had
me
it
check.
here.
Oh,
yeah. Damn cleaning lady.
The Marks for Marks in this issue, this is from I think 94 June, and it would have been obviously in all of them, not just Quasar 59, but that's what I have in front of me. He gave a list of 10 things that every good Marvel story should have. And I just love this list, and I have shared it with others, and I love talking about it because it sums up who he was as a writer so completely. Because there's a lot of stuff that's kind of general and it's going to work in a lot of ways. It's the kind of stuff that I teach in my classroom. But then there are a few things here that are just Mark, and I just love them. So number one, interesting characters. Number two, events propelled by the character's specific actions and reactions. 3, multi-level conflicts, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, symbolic, etc. 4, character revealed by decisive actions and tough decisions. 6, character development, growth, and progression. 6.
Did we skip 5?
Did I skip 5? I said 5, but I called it 6.
Okay, so you know you got the readers on just like me.
Well, you know what?
I
was testing you, Rick, and you were there for me.
Bob doesn't. He's glazed over, but I pay attention.
So 6.1. So visual action-oriented stories. 7, sense of wonder. 8, resolutions with a sense of hope. 9, insight into some aspect of the human condition. 10, some unique element, something never before seen. And the list is great at the beginning, you know, getting into character stuff and talking about how you create character, what characters do. But then you get to this idea of hopefulness.
I know,
and,
number 8,
the positivity and optimism that comes through. And I love teaching that in my classes too. Not every story will end with a sense of hope. You know, that's not how it always works. But I love that was something that Mark put such a precedent on in his own work and the way that he was helping teach others. And I love seeing a list like this because it's Mark as teacher, you know, trying to share what he's done and what works with others. And I think it's just splendid.
Well, the one thing that I think about Captain America is confidence. When he wasn't really have a superpower per se, but he really had a lot of confidence, um and he knew who he was, and I think that was what Mark to take it on, because he knew who he was. He knew Mark. He knew himself, and he thought like Captain America because he believed in the that your job should be a reflection of your morals and your integrity. And that's one of the reasons why it got so interesting when he created that character US agent, because he didn't want Cap to take any like yes man status, and be conflicted that way. Was so interesting because he wasn't a rah patriot and my country do or die. And I thought to myself, after he passed away, that was kind of his moral like crisis when Marvel was spiraling down and the bankruptcy was happening. You can love your job too much, and he really felt like he was compromised, and they were trying to get him to write stories with more merchandise possibilities in it. And he would come home and say, that's not the way I create comic books. That's not the way I want to attack a storyline. And so the fact that you're bringing up all of that, it really it reflects back to the fact that Mark was the right person for the job. He took it on. They were going to cancel Cap. He said that they were going to cancel it, and he took it on. And he really wanted to give Cap depth and turn him into something that was interesting and conflicted, because most Marvel characters do have that dark side. And when Cap, just gave his uniform back, and that whole storyline, that story arc, and he really tried to match the stories with what was happening in the headlines. So Streets of Poison, it was a lot of drug crisis in the inner cities. And he immediately, he was always anchored in the fact that Marvel was set in reality, like same presidents, same, whereas DC had more, Gotham City that doesn't exist, but that Marvel was really anchored in reality. And I think he really loved exploring that and bringing himself into it. And I know that I lived with Captain America. I mean, I know what it was like to live with Captain America. He always tried to do the right thing. I know that sounds, almost too altruistic and too idealistic, but he really tried to do the right thing with everyone, to everyone, and not to play favorites or just his inside Marvel persona, the way he wrote, the way he lived, was all very, very integrated and woven into the tapestry of himself as a man. I saw that very clearly in his writing, and he was proud, so proud of the work he did on Captain America.
Yeah, it came through. It came through in his work.
Yeah.
You could see the character that he was trying to share with the audience, a character that he knew and he loved, that maybe wasn't the cool thing in during that time period in America, right? But he stuck with those principles. And I go back to that list that you referenced, Jason. Number 8 and number 9 really stood out to me, as to really sums up the period of Mark Gruenwald on Captain America. So thanks for sharing that.
And he wrote those editors. I mean, he conducted those.
Thank you for acknowledging the number.
So, he taught editors on Monday morning how to write comics. And, those were, kind of his mores and the way he operated, and really took the task of taking that on himself. Nobody asked him to create the assistant editors class. He created that. His father was a teacher, and he created that because he wanted to pass on the legacy of writing comic books the right way. And that's what you read was very true to how he taught the class. And people are, I mean, there's people today who have taken his class at Marvel and said it was life-changing, and that they owe a debt of gratitude to him for having that class, because no one was teaching anyone how to write comic books the right way.
Yeah, and when you were on the show last, I think it was back in episode 11, you also talked about how he really wanted everybody to take a screenwriter's class.
Yeah.
And that was very important because he could see where comics was going and with the movies and so on. And this was, you know, back in the 80s, right? And so he could see where things were moving, and he insisted that his team also learned how to do screenwriting. So he was very generous in that regard too.
Yeah, and he really, he felt as though, and I was talking to Jason about this, because I mean, a good storyboarded comic book is very similar to a screenplay. You know, it's really just an abbreviated form, but he really loved screenwriting. So I think he saw the writing on the wall and probably would have moved out to LA or something, but he was going to start working on screenplays, so but it's very related. I mean, the screenplay and the comic book storyboard is kind of related, and it kind of triggered something with Jason about how different disciplines integrate, and how you can take a skill set from one and put it into another, and it makes you a better writer. If you think like a screenplay, if you think like a movie, and you think that the comic book is a movie, it would be the next step to kind of just write a screenplay. So, and yeah, that was something he was working on.
I wanted to just add very quickly, because Catherine was setting me up a little bit for a project that I'm working on. And I want to make sure I take that before we get back to the bracket.
Over to you, Jason.
Yes, because the conversation that we're having about the way that different genres can intersect, I'm actually writing a textbook about this. And it's a creative writing textbook in which most of the main chapters are taking two creative writing genres and talking about what you learned from each one. And talking about being generous with one's time. Catherine had a meeting with me a few months ago in which we talked about the intersections between fiction and screenwriting, and how I saw comic books there. And so it was so exciting for me to hear about the way Mark saw that too, and how comics really worked in that way, and using the storyboard term. So there's a little bit of Mark in my work, and also literally in the textbook I'm writing, because there's a section in which I talk about him and that interest in screenwriting. So it's exciting the ways that Mark gets into different aspects of all of our worlds and works, even when it isn't as direct as comics and maybe brackets. Right, Bob?
Yeah. Well, let's bring it back to the bracket. So I know, you're not just a fan, but you're an academic as well. And so I know you try to keep up with reading Captain America comics. So based on what you've gleaned from your research, do you have any thoughts about who Mark might have voted for in the bracket?
We can only speculate here. But when I see the stuff that I valued in Mark's work, and I think it can kind of translate. And I think one person that he might have liked perhaps more than the fans did might be Nick Spencer. I think that there's a lot of stuff that Nick did that felt very connected to stuff. He brought the serpent solutions came in. There's a little Capwolf stuff that was in there. There was a sense of humor that Nick used in a lot of the works. And I when I was reading Nick's run on a couple, on the Sam Wilson and maybe less so in the Steve Rogers one. And we'll talk about that elephant in the room in a second. But I really felt like there was a lot of stuff in Nick's work that reminded me a lot of Mark's. Obviously, the reason why I can't remember, was it Roger McKenzie that defeated Nick Spencer in the bracket? So maybe there's a lot of Roger McKenzie stands that are in our group.
So let's talk about that. So here's who Mark Gruenwald beat to win. Okay, so and we started this with in the Facebook group. We wanted to have it seeded, right? So based on the amount of votes, you were seeded 1 through 32. And Mark got the most votes during the seeding process. So he was number 1. So he went up against number 32, Mike Carlin, which was Bob. Bob knows this. Bob, who was Mike Carlin?
Rick, everybody knows this. Rick, he followed JM after issue 300. Had 6 issues before Mark took over.
Yeah, right.
You're brilliant, Bob. You're brilliant. Okay, so Mark beat Mark Carlin, and then he went up against seed number 16, and he beat Jeff Loeb. Now, Jeff Loeb, where some people might associate him with Volume 2, where he worked with Rob Liefeld, but mostly what he's beloved for is the Captain America White miniseries or the Fallen Sun, which was the Death of Captain America miniseries. Then, and this is impressive, ready? He went up against seed number 8, Jack Kirby. Now, not Jack Kirby, the artist, Jack Kirby, the writer. And he won, and he beat out Jack Kirby. Then it got down to the final 4, and he went up against J.M. DeMatteis.
Yeah.
So one of my favorite Cap writers. It's who I grew up on. And he beat DeMatteis, then went to the finals, and he went up against number 2 seed, Ed Brubaker. And it was a close one. It was close, but he did win. And so I'm going to bring it back to, I did reach out to some of the other writers in the bracket to get their thoughts on Gru. And I heard back from a few. J.M. DeMatteis was the writer for Cap from 1981 to 1984. And as I mentioned, he was voted into the final 4. And a lot of people may have forgotten this, but Mark was J.M.'s editor starting in 1982. And the two of them worked closely together on the series for a couple of years. And so J.M. shared with me the following, which I'll read here on the show. Mark wasn't just a wonderful editor and writer. He was a friend. As much as fans may justifiably admire the great body of work he left behind, the real loss for those of us who knew him, even all these years later, is his absence from our lives. Mark was smart. He was funny. He was creative, passionately in love with comics, and most important, a genuinely good person. That loss still echoes on.
Yep.
So Catherine, perhaps you could talk a little bit about the impact Mark made on people's personal lives as we witnessed during the 20-year memorial you held in 2016.
Yeah, I mean, I had people like Denny O'Neil speak, Tom Brevoort, Tom DeFalco, Danny Fingeroth, Carl Potts. And there's kind of a through line. I wrote an article for the back issue with Michael Urey and the Tomorrows, and it was called Gru the Influencer, and it was like leaving an indelible mark. And I didn't have enough. I wrote the preface to it, but I let everyone speak in their own voice, and fans, people who worked with him. It just came down to that essence of him just being like a great guy. He always cared about everyone. He worked, especially when Marvel was firing people. He had to fire 25 people on Christmas week. And talk about heartbreaking. I mean, they really did break his heart. He was really upset about that, and they wouldn't let him help get work for anyone. So it was like his hands were tied. And when I first started dating him, I went to his apartment. He had 8x10s of the people at the Marvel office hung up on his wall, framed on his wall. And that was his universe. Those were the people that he loved, that he worked with. Everyone from Virginia Ramita to Millie to Florence Steinberg. I mean, everyone was on that wall. And I said, most people want to get away from the people they work with. Mark framed them all and cared so much about this one's tuition, that one's got a mortgage, this, so he really, he took it, he really took it to heart. And that was something that really impressed me with how that whole universe of Marvel, people, editors, staff, bullpen, and I took so much away from that because that's the way I do my events now. I don't put myself as the guy who knows all the answers. And Mark said, I'll take an idea from a 2-year-old. So you have to leave yourself open for that. And, he was constant. He said everything was tax deductible. So he would go to my shows, he would go to whatever, and he could put it into the book. And, in fact, my niece visited us right after we were married, and he made her an amalgam of me and my niece into Free Spirit.
Yeah, I love this story. Yeah. Yeah, Free Spirit. Yeah, came from, and her name is very close to what the
Kathy
character's
Webster. Name. So it was Kathy Weber, and then she was named for me. So it was like the fashion and the hate men, hunt men, hurt men, and and he created that after she went back. She stayed with us for 8 weeks. And it was great. But I saw him, just like every good writer does, writes from what he knows. But he made my sister like, someone in the lab, in the story, and those little Easter eggs that were just so telling. And I just really feel like he cared so much about Marvel. He said, I am Mark Eugene Gruenwald, Marvel Entertainment Group, MEG. I am with this company. I love working with it. And, he just, and even now that I'm getting to know Shooter, I'm taking the high road on the Shooter thing. Because, think about it. He did hire a lot of the greatest people who were working in the industry at that moment. And it couldn't have been easy for him being a young kid trying to make people sign their vouchers. So, Shooter had his foibles, but he also, you have to be a fan turned pro. That's one thing.
Mark was a fan turned pro. Yeah. Right.
So he appreciated those people who just weren't in it as a job. It was comics were everything to him, everything. And the people he worked with at the comic book industry, it just, it was all tightly woven into this whole tapestry of his life. It just, he always was thinking of comics, always 24/7. Always. And so I took a lot of that in the way that I run my event production company. So I put a lot of different aspects into it and make it very personal. And I care about everyone who's working backstage, and I learn their name. I know who they are, and I know what dreams they're trying to accomplish. So, I'll try and fulfill that, because I want to be the person I wish I had met when I first moved to New York. So that's kind of the way that I took from the bullpen, and the way Mark was such a great leader. But he had a lot of fun too. So I don't have Mark's killer sense of humor, so I don't make things as much fun as Mark made. Everyone just, he was so funny. And I just, I revel in what he was able to do with the fans, with the office, he really he got a kick out of what he did, and he just loved everyone being part of. And I think if you could make somebody laugh, if you could make them want to come to work, it wasn't easy, being a person who, was a senior executive editor, trying to make people operate on a deadline. Yeah, you have a dream job. You're in the creative, but if someone said my uncle died one more time. How many times can your dog die? You know, it's just he heard every excuse, and he tried to set that example where, I mean, yes, he had an unending vat of ideas that he pulled from. I have never met a person who was more creative and more, I mean, 10 bad ideas, one good idea, it didn't matter. He just kept the ideas, you know, coming, and they were very groanable, you know. Some of them were just laughably bad, and he liked that too. You know, he would just laugh, and everybody relied on him for that kind of wit and wisdom. But well, obviously it's a huge loss in the industry. You know, but you know, it's just, you just integrate it, you know. So I feel as though I was fortunate to know him, and I'm his legacy advocate. And it's something that I take very, very personally, and I do a lot in his name. And you know, I think that he'd be very proud of how his work lives on, you know, with what we're talking about right now. I mean, he said, I can't imagine having an insignificant life. So the fact that we're talking about somebody 26 years later, I hope somebody remembers me 26 years from now. Oh my God.
Well, Catherine, Jason, you know, we do have some questions from some of our patrons, all of which are Gru fans. And so are you both trying to answer a game to answer some of them?
Sure.
All right.
Yes.
All right. Well, the first one we have is from Ash Barnes, and she asks, out of all of Mark's greatest creations, one of my personal favorite creations is U.S. Agent. Do either of you have any thoughts you might want to share on that character, about maybe where he was coming from or what he was trying to achieve with that character?
Go ahead, Jason.
I always love the interview that he gave where he talked about the origin of the character, how fans were asking why Captain America can't be more like Rambo. We can put ourselves very squarely in the 80s, right? And his answer was always, well, my interpretation of Steve Rogers is not Rambo. There's no way that Steve Rogers can ever be Rambo. But if you want Rambo, I can do it. And that's where the character came from. But it's even more complicated than that and more interesting than that, because we're talking about Mark, right? So we know it's more interesting. That Super Patriot comes out of the idea of all of a lot of the villains that he introduced in that first year of the comic, representing different ideologies that sort of stand in contrast to what Steve and Captain America is representing. And so you have characters that represent things like anti-nationalism and stuff like this.
Flag Smasher.
Smasher. But then you
keep going. I can name them.
Battlestar.
I'm gonna stick with Super Patriot though. But what does Super Patriot represent?
Oh, what would the category be?
Yeah.
That would be kind of like over the top. That would be just a far extremist.
So you know? if Captain America is patriotic, does that mean that patriotism is always good? And Mark seems to come to the conclusion that not really. So then we get this hyper over the top version of that in Super Patriot, which then becomes Captain America, which is a fascinating way to take this character. So you've got Rambo, but you've also got Rambo taking patriotism to a level that is completely unhealthy and unsafe for everyone. So I think that's a fascinating take that we get to, and so that's what I always think of with the characters. Just what a wonderful series of origins, and what an interesting character, and how Mark makes that character sympathetic as it goes down. How the heck does he do that? But as we continue, we don't like John Walker. At least I don't like John Walker as a character fully, but I'm kind of looking forward to when he shows up later on, as it moves on. And I think that that's an amazing accomplishment, that he takes someone who really represents a lot of the things that Steve doesn't, but still makes him compelling. I mean, Mark was so good at making compelling characters. And it's so much fun to read them.
Yeah, he loved, and I remember when I was watching Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and that whole campaign, Not My Cap, because they had that stupid chin strap on Wyatt Russell that made him look like the guy from Up. And, you know, it was kind of a goofy looking costume. So they were trying to make him unsympathetic or, you know, like look like a doofus. But I think that, you know, it was a necessary evil, and it was one that he knew how to introduce. And Johnny Walker was funny because it's, you know, it's alcohol and, you know, the whole Johnny Walker. And but he really liked that character because it represented kind of a yes man, you know, and you know, my country do or die, and you know, just, you know, whatever the government wants you to do, you do. And that was definitely a great foil for him to create this character that actually showed Cap's depth and showed his integrity, and you know, that he didn't appreciate the fact that the government was making him do something and he didn't want to do, and they were you know, but they found somebody who would do it, and it was in the form of U.S. agent. It was just such a great a great story arc and line to introduce.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun covering it here on the podcast. We did the whole thing. It was a lot of fun covering it panel by panel. All right, so Chet Cox asks this question, and I don't know, Jason, this might be more for you because I think it's more of a comic geek kind of question, but he said, I always wondered why, with Mark's A Treatise on Reality in Comic Literature and Omniverse, why did Mark not explain away Cap and Namor's initial common amnesia in Avengers 4, the very moment he put his foot in Marvel's door? And I think I think that's a good question because, you know, because Mark was known as the continuity cop for Marvel. And so do you think he would have gotten to that Stan Lee, Jack Kirby oversight at some point?
It's funny, that oversight too, isn't it? You go back in that issue, and not only does Cap not remember Namor, he even makes a comment about, wow, wouldn't it have been interesting to have interacted with this person back during the war? And so it's like this sort of wink at it. I think if it would have been relevant to a story that Mark was writing, then he would have addressed it. I think the continuity cop thing was absolutely true, but it was also not going to be at the expense of any story that he was writing. I know there's a quote that I include in my book where he talks about not wanting to see continuity as a slavish, single-minded like devotion to trivial ideas, that you can't just have it just connect the dots, that there has to be a reason for it. So I think with like that example, which is a very, very valid example, it's kind of absurd, frankly, in that issue. And I think if there would have been a relevant moment for Mark to address it, he would have, but I don't think he was somebody who was going to connect those dots just for the sake of doing it. The story and the characters mattered most. I wish somebody would have, because it's kind of strange, but you know, Cap just thawed out. Maybe he just forgot the nearly naked winged-footed man that was trying to kill him.
Of course, I think Roy Thomas. Roy Thomas, I think, explained it at some point. I don't know, but
you're right. Roy did in that one issue that I think he wrote. So we got another one. Nate Charles asks, and this might be good for you, Catherine, if you want to tackle this one. Otherwise, we can kick it over to Jason and see what he has to say. But with such a lengthy run and such a deep adoration of the character, was there anything that Mark was particularly proud to have added to the Cap mythos?
Well, he took it on. He said that they were going to cancel it. They were going to cancel Cap, and he really thought that he could take it on and add dimension and depth to it, and I think he did. I think in those days, like we're talking about ancient times here, but in those days when books were selling very well and people were reading it, and they were reading it for the storyline, and they were reading it for interesting messages and what the philosophies were behind it. I think that Mark loved the ability to take that on, because he felt like, I mean, he was a Midwestern guy from, Wisconsin. He was a kid from Wisconsin. Doesn't get more Midwest than that. When he took me back to his hometown, he took me to where he got his Boy Scout badge. He took me to the fire engine house. He took me to where he had his first job. I mean, he was Captain America. He believed in the institutions of the American way, and family and all those values. He wasn't religious, at all. He was more spiritual in that respect, but that was the only thing that I think a lot of people associate with America now, is this whole religious aspect. And that was something he totally wanted to avoid. So I think it gave him a platform to really analyze the discrepancies in society. He read the New York Times every day. He got a copy of the New York Times. It's way before the internet, and it was delivered to our doorstep, and he read that thing cover to cover. And he was always talking, and he scoured it. There was a something in Marvel Age, I guess Mark's Remarks or something, but it's like couplets, like two different things that were happening. He was always looking for those kind of trending, word plays. So he studied what was going on in society. He studied, he made me watch Poldark. I mean, Poldark is his secret sauce. Joseph Campbell is his secret sauce. And he doesn't really talk too much about it, but as his wife, we watched Poldark, and I watched Joseph Campbell, Bill Moyers, Joseph Campbell. If you want to understand the way Mark loved the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell is really his secret sauce. And he was very, he was very true to that aspect.
I think another thing that Mark's really prided himself on was the consistency that he was able to give the character as a writer. That Cap had never had a writer that was on for a huge duration of time. We had great writers, obviously, that preceded Mark. We had a whole bracket full of at least some of them. But I think that was something that was really important to him, that he had that amazing run at it. And, we talked a little bit about other writers that would follow Mark, and obviously we got to talk about Brubaker at least a little bit as the runner-up. And I think one of the things that Mark would really be happy about is that there'd be somebody that would have followed that wouldn't have had quite as long a run, and maybe he'd be okay with that. Not that he was competitive, maybe he didn't quite reach that 10-year mark, but Brubaker put such an imprint on the comic in such a long run that was so distinctive, and very different than what Mark did, and a different interpretation of the character and the supporting cast. But I think that that's something that really seemed to matter, is that he gave that comic some stability, and as Catherine says, life that it might not have had if he wouldn't have taken over and excelled in the way that he did.
So we have another question from Catman, who was recently a guest on the show as well, and he wrote, I met Mark once when he was an editor, and he was incredibly kind and attentive. I think he's one of the all-time greats. When Mark was writing Cap, he was firmly against killing. For example, MODOK in issue 313. In later issues, Mark's Cap physically blocks Nomad from killing the Slug. How do you think Mark would justify his point of view on killing compared to most of the comic creators who have come after him? So, Kat, what do you think?
Yeah, he was very, he didn't like serial murders. He did not like murder.
I'm against those
death.
too. I'm just going to tell you right now.
I'm on the fence.
And and then when I was watching the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and he kills Flag Smasher with the shield, and there's blood on that shield. I just, I was like, oh my God, Mark he was very anti-violence. He was very anti-violence, even though, you would say that the comic book world, between scantily clad women and, the role of violence in comics, you could make an argument for that, but I don't think that Mark ever wanted to have those tokenisms, that gratuitous kind of and you know, that was very, that just wasn't, didn't he just it was too easy too. You want to kill somebody, really? How about outwit them? How about, you know, get into their psyche and then figure out how to trick them? You know, that would have been so much more interesting to him than just killing them. You know,
Jason,
really.
Jason, you wrote about this in your book, right? And so do you have something you want to add?
I do. And I think that it's interesting, the examples that Catman gives, because there are others too. I mean, there's a lot of them. And it reminds me of something that Catherine said earlier, which was how important it was for Mark to give conflict to the character of Steve Rogers in Captain America. And one of the ways he does it is so interesting because it's from a moralistic perspective, that Cap is sort of conflicted by his own morality, but he's not really. And I think not of an issue that involves killing, but one where Sidewinder asks Cap for help to help get money for his sick daughter, and Cap helps, but only in the condition that he will arrest Sidewinder. And Diamondback, who is obviously a character who's going to be more conflicted and feels more like a human in this perspective, that there are these moments where he depicts Steve's morality as like, is it okay? Is it a problem? Especially as it goes on. And I know that the answer is no, it's not. Because Steve Rogers is always going to do the right thing, and that's the way it is. But in those later issues, and maybe it's reflecting Mark's own perception of a changing world that he's in, he never wavers. But then it's also a question of like, well, where do I fit in this world? Which I think is such a fascinating, sophisticated way of looking at this. And you know, I think that Mark would justify it because this is a character who has a strong sense of right and wrong, and killing is wrong. And yeah, you know, we get back to the continuity thing. Does that contradict things that happened earlier? Well, sure. You know, I can defer to somebody who's not here on this. We take a look at J. Richard Stevens' book, where he has a lot of specific sections that talk about the numbers of death at different times and how it decreases. And when Steve does have to kill a ultimatum agent, Greg, do you want to give me the acronym and what it stands for? I'm kidding.
Oh, you gonna throw me under the bus like that?
Thank you, Jason. Thank you.
I will say, talking about J. Richard Stevens, check out episode 47 when we have a long conversation with J. Richard Stevens about his book. But go ahead, Jason. You can continue now.
The book Captain America, Masculinity and Violence.
Yes.
Which is a great book, and it was a great podcast.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. And so I think that there's a lot of really interesting and compelling stuff that Mark does with morality. It doesn't feel boring. You know, it doesn't feel like, okay, Steve's always going to do the right thing. He does, but sometimes it's a journey. And as I talk about in the book, he has to sometimes take a while to reach the moralistic conclusion. And there are times in which, you know, Steve will have a question like, "Oh, should I join SHIELD in order to make the murder that I committed of shooting that ultimatum agent in order to save all those people, to kind of cover that up? Should I join SHIELD and then they'll just make that whole problem go away?" And we know he won't do that because that's not the right thing to do. Yet he takes time to try to figure it out. There's a time where he considers taking the I don't remember what it was, the treatment that will turn him into a super buff wrestler dude. He debates, should I do it? Because, you know, I can keep up with guys like Super Patriot, and we know he won't do that. But it takes time because he still has to reason. He still has to think. One of my favorite things about Mark, why Mark is my favorite comic writer of all time, is everyone thinks so much.
Yes.
It's one of my favorite things about your episodes where you're reading through those issues.
The thought balloons, gotta love them. Mark was Mark was brilliant at those. You would get thought balloons, like the janitor would be sweeping, and then you would get a thought balloon from the janitor going, "Wow, that's a crazy looking person." You know, Mark was brilliant at that, and he allowed us to get into the thoughts of not only the major characters, but some of the minor characters. And some of my favorite stories that you're pointing out, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jason, but you got me excited. But some of my favorite parts were just seeing the inner monologue that Steve, just grappled with, just doing the right thing. And it showed with his confliction that he was just like us.
Right.
He may have had this super soldier serum, but when it came down to it, he was just like any one of us readers,
Right.
and that we all struggled with something, and Steve struggled with it. And ultimately, what did he do? He did the right thing. And just like any of us can do the right thing if we just ask, what would Cap do?
Yeah. Oh, I have my little circle. I have that.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jason. I interrupted you.
No, that was a wonderful thought. It's one of the things that I love about Mark as a writer, and especially the way that he writes Captain America, is because he emphasizes the importance of service and being there for other people, and I think that's one of the differences between his take on Cap and a lot of the stuff that happens after, a lot of the stuff that happened before, where Cap was more of a SHIELD agent, or kind of adjacent to SHIELD, where Cap sets up a hotline and, hey, there's something weird in my barn. Let's call Captain America. He can come and check it out and see what's going on. And that's what Captain America would do. It's like, okay, I hear you got a weird thing in the barn. Let's go see what it is. And I love that. It's like sort of showing the way that we can take service directly to the people. And I think it's been an inspiring thing for me. And I've learned in my life, starting with those comics at a very early age, how important it is to be there for other people. And Mark really taught me that through Cap.
So getting back to Catman's question about Mark justifying, and you explained that very well, but he talked about the comic creators who came after him. I know you and we talked a little off air about, you were mentioning Ed Brubaker, and Mark ended up beating Ed Brubaker in the bracket. That you had said there's also some similarities between him and Mark, where Ed kind of carried Mark's torch, that maybe not be so obvious. Maybe you can just point that out.
Yeah, I think that the longevity is certainly one of them. Long form storytelling. One thing that Mark did that was so great was he would have long storylines that would have smaller storylines in them. We talked earlier about the John Walker Captain storyline that goes on for issue after issue with all sorts of sub stories that are in there. That's something the Brubaker did really well too, that you'd have these long arcs, but then the arcs themselves would connect to each other. I think the first thing that Mark wanted to do, based on the things that he said, was Cap needs a better rogues gallery. Cap's villains are not up to where we need to be. So that first year, that's one of the main things he did. Never de-emphasizing Steve, but building up these different villains and creating compelling new adversaries in a lot of ways for that.
Yeah.
And I think one of the first things Brubaker did is wanted to bring in new characters, specifically Winter Soldier, that were going to bulk and strengthen the things that are going on. I think that Winter Soldier in some ways feels a little John Walker, a little rogue Captain America. Obviously, it's a more sympathetic character. It's a character who was not able to make these decisions on his own initially, where John Walker, in theory, was. But I think that having this more violent prone, this more prone to violence version of Captain America was something that happened in very different ways. I mean, Brubaker takes it in a very, very different way. I don't know how Mark would have felt about a Steve Rogers that was maybe not as morally pure in some ways. I mean, he's not impure, but he seems to have less conflict over certain things at times. He seems to be less inclined toward platonic relationships with women than Steve.
But he did take Diamond back.
That's true. That's true. But
bad girl of all times.
And it all seemed to happen mostly off panel, right? Where it feels less implied and more direct in Brubaker, which they're just a different era and a different approach. But I think they do have a lot in common. They both were writing Cap. When it comes to me and I think about this, would I have read the Brubaker run if it didn't have Captain America on it? And I don't know if I would have, because I don't know if the approach and style would have captured my imagination, because I am very much a superhero kind of reader. but that would have been to my disservice, because I think it's a brilliant run, and I really enjoyed reading it, even if it makes me uncomfortable at times. And I think that was something the Brewbreaker was going for. I think it's a challenging, difficult work. I enjoy reading Mark's more, but I think that there's a lot of value to it, and I think I would hope that there'd be things that maybe Mark would really like about it too. I don't know.
One more question from our patrons. Joshua Van Dyne asks, and Catherine, you may know this. You may know the answer to this. Did Mark have a plan to end his time with Cap before he got the news that he was being kicked off the book, or would he have just kept writing it until he ran out of ideas if Marvel had let him?
Yeah, I think he was sad, but I don't think he's a typical type A personality. He didn't let me see, well, I guess they just think that, I've come to the end of my usefulness, and they want to give it to somebody else. And I think it saddened him, but he didn't want to admit it. But and I mean, I know Sean Howe goes into how he had that issue in his backpack that the weekend that he died, and I didn't look in his backpack, but it really came out, and I don't think he was happy with how what they did with Cap, and it was horrible, and he was baffled, and I think they were kind of grasping at straws and trying to sell more books, and I don't think he got caught up in all that. And I mean, yes, it's all about sales, and hey, we have to pay people salaries and all that, but I think he would have loved to have stayed on. He had a lot more to say, and he would have definitely thought up some really great storylines and kept working on it, because why not? We've come this far.
I don't think I know that story about the backpack. Which issue of Captain America was in his backpack?
Well, they took him off the book in '95 then, and then so it took a while for the new issues to come out, and I think that one dropped that summer. That and I think it was probably sometime in August when they released that. Okay. And Sean said in his book, that it bothered him because it was not up to type of storyline that he would have done, and that he's just trying to show how they broke his heart.
So this was was this the volume 2?
Was it Liefeld?
Yeah. Liefeld? Yeah. Was that it? Okay. Well, there was a period between when Mark left and when Rob Liefeld took over, and that was Mark Waid, and so he followed, and he actually made it to the final 4 of the bracket, Mark Waid. And when we mentioned to Mark that we were celebrating Gru today, he actually sent the following message. It's hard to count the number of ways in which I miss Mark, and in which this industry is poorer without him, even after all these years. When he passed the baton to me on Captain America, he was unbelievably kind, accessible, and helpful, passing along reams of research and notes he cooked up during his tenure, and eager to answer any questions I might have. I have such respect for Mark, his talent, and his Cap run in particular. He'll always be remembered as one of the greats.
Yeah, I mean, he wanted to make sure that whoever took it over, if it wasn't his continuing on it, that the character didn't suffer, because he really cared about the characters. As much as he cared about those people on the wall that he framed, he cared about the characters, and that was his responsibility to pass that baton on and to be as gracious as possible, because it would make Marvel look good. You know, he really was Mark Eugene Gruenwald. He was MEG, and you know that's the right thing to do. So if Cap didn't get the job, he would help the guy, you know, who had the job that he didn't get. And that's why Mark was very special, because he could sublimate his ego and you know, to the reality of the fact that this character must go on, and everything that he had done would be diminished if the character wasn't strong going forward with a new writer. And I think that was something that he was very capable of doing, and it was just a really good, admirable trait. Not everybody could do that. Oh, you know, I'm going to undermine the person who's coming out after me. I want them to look bad, so I look good. That never crossed his mind.
Well, speaking of gracious, I just want to say thank you for both of you, Catherine and Jason, for being so gracious with your time to come on to today's episode to help celebrate Mark. But before we let you go, Catherine, maybe you could start. What's keeping you busy nowadays? Are there any upcoming projects you can share with the listeners?
Yeah, I do a lot of, you know, work with his hometown. We have a Mark Gruenwald comic book creation challenge that happens every year, and Zeroni's Pizza, the House of Heroes, the Aviation Museum, the Literacy Council, and the Oshkosh Public Library all conduct this comic book challenge, and they have 6 different categories: a family category, age 6 all the way up to 60. And every year we judge, and my producer publishes the books, because he's got a publishing house. So that's going to start in May 5th. And then I started Cosplay Runway, because Mark always came to my fashion shows and said comics and fashion are very related. So I just made Comic Con have a baby with Fashion Week.
And
so Cosmoda is that.
How can people find out more about Cosmoda?
Just go on Instagram to cosplay.runway, and you'll see Cosmoda. And yeah, we're just ramping up. We're going to do some really interesting stuff with the next iteration, and talking to Frank Miller, maybe doing some very specific Sin City cosplay run with that. And Bill Sienkiewicz, we're doing some good stuff with him. And my friend had a flood in his comic book store, so I'm making these bracelets out of old comic books. And
oh no!
So Gru would love that, because I'm sustainable. So instead of throwing them in the landfill, I am making comic book bracelets. So I'm calling them Power Pieces, Heroic Adornment.
And how do we find out more about that?
It's on Instagram at power.pieces. So
power.pieces,
earrings. And I just did a whole custom series for Xena, and I do Wonder Woman, which is Mark's first love. He was a big JLA person, and you know, he loved Wonder. That was his first crush. So I just did a whole series on Wonder Woman.
Oh, that's awesome. All right. Well, we will have to check those out. And Jason, how about you? What, you got any projects coming up?
I do. I already shamelessly plugged it earlier.
Oh,
but we'll reiterate.
Book. Yeah.
That Intersecting Genres, which is a creative writing textbook in which, as I said earlier, takes different genres and sort of compares, contrasts, talks about what you learn from one while writing another, is going to be coming out from Bloomsbury Academic Publishing in September of this year. And so I've been working on that, getting that all together, finished the proofs for that. It looks like a real book, so I'm pretty excited about that.
Wow.
Well, I know we have a lot of listeners who have always thought about getting into writing comics and creative writing, so that probably will be very helpful to them.
It was a lot of fun to write. As I'm a creative writer, my background is specifically in poetry. I have a PhD in creative writing poetry, but I've always really loved writing prose and anything. I never wanted to just feel like I only can write in one genre, and I don't. You know, I've written in poetry and fiction and academic comic book criticism and everything else. So I wanted to kind of take that passion and carry it on. So I'm excited about seeing that book And then
I have a question about that book. Is
Yeah.
there an ultimatum haiku in that book?
There is not.
Okay.
Are there, Rick also wants to know, are there a lot of pictures?
There's just a lot of pictures of ultimatum agents. It's weird. I don't know how it fits.
Well, maybe I'll check it out then.
Maybe it's there. No, I do not have a lot of haiku in this collection, but who knows what my next project will be. My immediate plans, and as a college professor, I've got to get through the next few weeks, and then I'd love to rest. It's not going to happen. But those would be my ideal plans.
Yeah. Now
I
with a
just want to
7
say
and 11
one thing about your book, the Star Spangled book. When I read that book, I've read it a couple times. I feel like I'm inside Mark's head, and I feel like you really, really understood him. And when I asked you why you didn't call me, why didn't you interview people, you said you didn't need to, because everything you got about Mark, you understood from his work. And I think that's just so commendable, and it really shows. And I feel like I'm spending time with my husband again when I read your book.
That's about the nicest thing that anyone said. When you first reached out to me afterwards, I told my wife, and we were just giddy. Mark told me what I needed to know. By reading the text, by reading, different Mark's remarks and different things and letter columns and all that, Mark gave me the information I needed. But I'm so pleased to get to talk to you and others and get that endorsement and that encouragement. It means the world to me.
Yeah.
I really
like Mark always said, when he found out that he could write, get out of your own way. Just tell the story. Just allow that you don't try and write. You have such a clear voice, and it just comes through. So you've really done the group proud.
And also, that's a huge testament to Mark himself and the fact that Jason was able to understand him through his writing.
I know. It blew me away when he said that. I didn't need to talk to anybody. I knew Mark through his work. I was like,
my goodness, I sound very arrogant.
No, but it is an excellent book, and we do encourage people to check that out. So again, thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Jason, for coming onto the show. We really do appreciate your time and now this opportunity to celebrate Gru.
Yeah, and I'm glad that everybody, appreciates his work still, and that it's going to live on. And that's the true test of an influencer, is like how your work lives on and resonates. And I think it's even more relevant today. I mean, they can't write these kind of stories. I mean, it's all happened. Just way Mark said it, it's all happening. So it's interesting that he probably had some pressure about that, and had the crystal ball that we really need to. I actually said it when the election was happening. Captain America needs to run. So it's a really wonderful opportunity to experience Mark again through his fans and through people who appreciate what he contributed to the industry, because it meant everything to him. He really lived and breathed comic books, and that's why I could get along with him, because I had my own career and I didn't need him to pay attention to me. And when are you going to stop with that comic book stuff? Which his wife and his other girlfriend said, like, what about me? And I said, no, I understand your purpose in this whole scheme and your purpose on the planet. So, we'll have time together when you're done writing. And I know he will always make it, because he was very disciplined about that. If he wrote from 12 to 6, he would see me at 6:30, and he never wavered. He said, I'll see you at 6:30. And he knew he had to wrap it up. And, so if I wanted to see him at 4, I knew not to do that, because he had writing times, and I gave him that, so anybody out there who has a creative husband or, significant other in their life, give them that time, because that is, that's who they are. That's really who they are. And
so, Bob, are you going to ask ask Casey to listen to this episode now?
No, she'll say no. So I'm just, but I'm not a creative type. So,
right. What have I done? All the wives are going to hang up on me. Don't forget to take out the garbage.
There you go. I did that already tonight, Catherine.
Me too. It's Tuesday night.
It's done. It's Tuesday night. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. And this was a delight to get to talk about Mark's work and how it's mattered and how it still resonates. And as Catherine was saying, it's such a testament to what he did that we're still talking about this. And it's a testament to you too, Catherine, that you've done such a great job of carrying on his legacy and working toward that. It's wonderful. And I hope that through this podcast, through this tournament, through everything that we've done, that people will continue to discover his work and see all the good that it can bring.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining the show.
Bye, guys.
Have a good night.
Yay.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, Bob. It was fun going down memory lane with Catherine and Jason, talking about some great stories about Mark. And I'm so happy we were able to do this and help celebrate him. And just talk about his legacy as an amazing Captain America writer.
Yeah, and we had the right two people on the show to do just that. So if you haven't read the Star-Spangled Symbolism of Captain America, the book that Jason Olsen published about a year and a half ago about Mark Gruenwald's 10-year run, definitely encourage you to pick it up because it's a fabulous read.
Absolutely. I agree. I couldn't agree more. And then come back next episode, 135, where we revisit volume 7, and we're now part 4 of Castaway in Dimension Z. And it's getting real interesting, Bob. Real interesting. Yeah. Cap has been stuck in Dimension Z for years now. Years. And he's trying to raise and keep alive the young Ian, who was essentially, you could say Arnim Zola's son, right? That he engineered, and it's just it's a really cool story. So make sure you come back next episode for part 4.
I will be there.
All right, Bob.
I can't promise more than that, but I'll be there.
But yeah, it's the least you could do. All right, he's Bob Lucius. I'm Rick Verbanis, and you have been listening to another episode of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast. So, Bob, we do have a current Captain America writer who wanted to chime in on celebrating Mark Gruenwald.
Really? Who?
Well, that would be Tochi Oyabuchi.
I love Tochi.
For those of you who aren't familiar with his work, that would be the current writer for the Sam Wilson Captain America series, which is Captain America Symbol of Truth. Mm-hmm. And so Tochi has been the writer for that series since the beginning. And when he learned about favorite Captain America writer March Madness bracket, he was obviously honored to be part of that, but also he had a few words that he wanted to share for the winner, Mark Gruenwald.
Well, that's a great surprise. I love Tochi. We had a great conversation with him, and I'm excited to hear what he has to say about the grand winner of it all, Mark Gruenwald.
Yeah, first of all, he was very honored to make it into the Sweet 16, so he was excited about that. But regarding Mark Gruenwald, he wrote, "I knew writing Captain America that I would be joining some august company, and Mark Gruenwald, with his stewardship and his storytelling, has been both an inspiration and an aspiration for me. The Captain America should have enemies and mirrors specific to him was my guiding light in writing Symbol of Truth. And I have Mark to thank for teaching me that."
That's really great.
Yeah, that was very nice by Tochi.
Yeah.
And I think, Mark Olsen had kind of commented on that, right? Mm-hmm. About Mark Gruenwald's theory of it was important for Cap to have enemies that mirror specific portions of him.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked a little bit about that in our conversation tonight. But the fact that Tochi took that to the next level, and Tochi is using that in his current series with Symbol of Truth, that's pretty cool.
That is cool. That is cool. Standing on the shoulders of giants.
100%. Yeah. So thanks, Tochi, for sharing your thoughts on Mark Gruenwald.